Let's skip the drama. Name a number, I sign it, and this disappears.
I have learned one absolute truth in my 38 years on the bench. Money can buy you a lot of things. It can buy you a $5,000 suit, it can buy you a fleet of lawyers, and it can buy you a false sense of security. But let me tell you, there is one thing money cannot buy in my courtroom, and that is immunity from consequences. I have never seen someone learn that lesson as painfully as Preston Vanderwyck III did on the morning of November 12th. You think having a famous last name means you are untouchable. Stick with me, because what happened at exactly 9:14 a.m. went viral for a reason. If you believe that justice should be blind to a bank account, hit that subscribe button right now. You are going to want to see how this ends. The case file landed on my desk 2 days earlier. Case number 559, CV, civil damages and harassment. On paper, it looked like a simple property dispute, but when I opened the folder, I saw the photographs and my stomach turned. This wasn't just property damage, this was the systematic destruction of a man's livelihood. The defendant was Preston Vanderwyck III. You might know the name. His father owns Vanderwyck Pharmaceuticals, one of the largest companies in the state. Preston is 24 years old, lists his occupation as brand ambassador, and has never worked a real day in his life. He drives a custom neon green Lamborghini Urus. I know this because it was parked illegally in the judge's spot outside the courthouse when I arrived that morning. The victim was Mr. Arthur Henderson, 68 years old, a retired factory worker who spent his entire life savings to buy a small food truck. It was his dream. He named it Artie's Burgers. He parked it legally near the university every day for 3 years. He served students, gave free meals to the homeless, and was a pillar of the community. But Preston didn't like where Artie parked. Apparently, the food truck was an eyesore, visible from the balcony of Preston's $4 million penthouse apartment. The file contained 3 police reports. First, noise complaints that were unfounded, then health inspections that were called in anonymously, all passed. Finally, on October 4th, witnesses saw Preston throwing champagne bottles from his balcony onto the roof of Mr. Henderson's truck while laughing with his friends. The damage was estimated at $12,000. But it wasn't just the money. The glass shattered into the cooking area. Artie had to shut down for 3 weeks. He lost income. He lost his rhythm. And when he tried to ask Preston to pay for the repairs, Preston's lawyers sent him a cease and desist letter threatening to sue him for harassment. That is the kind of arrogance we are dealing with. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Preston arrived 15 minutes late. He didn't apologize. He walked in wearing sunglasses indoors, Tom Ford, likely $600. He wore a suit that cost more than Mr. Henderson's entire food truck. He was chewing gum, loudly. He didn't even look at the bench. He was too busy typing on his phone. Behind him was his lumpen legal team. Not one lawyer, but 3. The lead attorney was Charles Sterling, the kind of man who charges $1,000 an hour and smiles like a shark. They took up the entire defense table, spreading out their expensive leather binders and laptops. On the other side sat Arthur Henderson. He was alone. He wore a gray suit that was clearly 20 years old, a bit tight at the shoulders, but pressed and clean. He held a crumpled hat in his hands. He looked tired. He looked small against the wall of corporate power on the other side. I called the court to order. Mr. Vanderwyck, I said, please remove your sunglasses in my courtroom. Preston didn't move. He didn't look up from his phone. He just held up a finger, like he was telling a waiter to, wait a second. Hold on, he said. I'm tweeting this. The courtroom gasped. I felt the heat rise in my neck. Mr. Vanderwyck, I said, my voice dropping that octave that usually makes defendants freeze. Stand up. He finally looked up. He slid the glasses down his nose, looked at me over the rim, and smirked. That same smirk I saw on the police chief last month. The smirk of a man who has never been told no in his entire life. He stood up, but he did it slowly, lazily. Relax, Judge, Preston said. My lawyers are here to do the talking. I'm just here because my dad said it would be good PR to show my face. So let's wrap this up. How much do I write the check for? $5 grand? 10? Let's just get it over with. I have a brunch reservation at 11. I looked at Arthur Henderson. He was looking down at his hands, humiliated. Then I looked back at Preston. You think this is about a check? I asked. Preston laughed. Everything is about a check, Judge. That's how the world works. Ask him, he pointed a lazy finger at Arthur. He's just looking for a payout. It's a shakedown. The truck was a piece of junk anyway. I did him a favor trying to improve the neighborhood aesthetic. Improve the aesthetic? I repeated. By throwing glass bottles from a balcony onto a workspace where a man was cooking, I was celebrating. Preston shrugged. It was a Tuesday. Whatever. Whatever. I whispered. I looked at his lawyer, Charles Sterling. Even Sterling looked uncomfortable. He tried to stand up. Your Honor, my client is young. He is merely expressing. Sit down, counselor. I snapped. Your client wants to speak. Let him speak. I want to hear everything he has to say. Because Preston didn't know it yet, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he was in a negotiation. He didn't realize he was walking into a trap, and I was about to spring it. Preston stood there, leaning against the defense table, checking his cuticles. He had just admitted to throwing glass bottles at a man's livelihood because he was celebrating. He thought he was untouchable. He thought this was a game of numbers. He was wrong. Mr. Vander Wyck, I said, leaning forward. You stated you were celebrating on the Tuesday in question. Might I ask what was so important that it required raining shards of glass onto Mr. Fowler? Henderson's head? Preston smirked. My crypto portfolio hit an all-time high. I made 300 grand while I was eating my morning bagel. I felt like popping bottles. It's a vibe, Judge. You wouldn't get it. A vibe, I repeated. And the anonymous health inspections? The noise complaints? Was that also a vibe? Preston shrugged. The guy runs a dirty truck. I was just doing my civic duty. If the health department calls came from anonymous citizens, that proves the neighborhood hates him. Anonymous citizens, I said slowly. I picked up a document from my bench. It was a thick stack of papers, stapled at the corner. I held it up so the entire courtroom could see. You see, Preston, when you file a false report with a government agency, you leave a trail. You used a burner app to make those calls. You thought that made you a ghost. But you made one critical mistake. You paid for the premium version of the app with your personal credit card. The color drained from his lawyer's face. Charles Sterling actually put his head in his hands. But Preston, he didn't flinch. He just rolled his eyes. So I made some calls, he said. Free speech. Sue me. We are past suing Mr. Vander Wyck, I said. This document is a subpoenaed log from the telecommunications provider. It shows 47 calls to the health department, the police, and the fire marshal in a span of 3 weeks. All from your account. All making false claims about Mr. Henderson's business. That isn't civic duty. That is criminal harassment. That is filing false reports. And in this state, when you use electronic means to do it, it's a felony. The word felony hung in the air. Preston laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Felony? Please. My dad plays golf with the district attorney. You think you can touch me with a phone bill? This is boring. Charles, write the check for the window or whatever. I'm leaving. Preston turned to grab his sunglasses. He actually started to walk toward the gate. Bailiff, I boomed. Lock those doors. The 2 deputies at the back of the room stepped forward, crossing their arms in front of the exit. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut. Preston stopped. He turned around, looking annoyed rather than scared. Excuse me? Am I being detained? You are not being detained, I said. You are being educated. You see, Mr. Henderson isn't just a food truck owner. Mr. Henderson, would you please stand and tell the court what you did before you bought that truck? Arthur Henderson stood up slowly. He cleared his throat. I was a structural engineer for the city, Your Honor. For 30 years, I built the bridge you drive over to get to work. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said. And Mr. Vander Wyck, do you know why that matters? Preston looked confused. Who cares? He flips burgers now. It matters, I said, my voice hardening, because Mr. Henderson had a dash cam installed on the corner of his truck. A high-definition, wide-angle camera he engineered himself to deter vandals. And do you know what that camera recorded on the morning of October 4th? I nodded to the court clerk. Play the video. The large monitors on the wall flickered to life. The video showed the roof of the food truck. Then, looking up toward the balcony, you saw Preston. He wasn't just throwing bottles, he was laughing. And then he did something that changed this from a property case to something much, much darker. In the video, Preston leaned over the railing with a lit firework, an M80. He lit the fuse and dropped it directly into the open ventilation hatch of the food truck. The explosion on screen was deafening. Smoke billowed out. You could see Mr. Henderson inside, falling to the ground, clutching his chest. The courtroom went silent. Preston wasn't smirking anymore. Attempted arson, I said. Assault with a deadly weapon. And reckless endangerment. You didn't just break a window, Preston. You tried to blow him up. Preston looked at his lawyer. Charles, do something. Charles Sterling stood up, closed his laptop, and put it in his bag. I'm sorry, Mr. Vander Wyck. I represent you in civil matters. I do not handle criminal defense for domestic terrorism. Terrorism, Preston shrieked. It was a prank. A prank is a whoopee cushion, I said. An explosive device in a commercial kitchen is a felony. And since you admitted to the celebration on the record, under oath, you just confessed. I looked at the bailiff. Take him into custody. Preston's eyes went wide. Wait, you can't arrest me. Do you know who my father is? I know who your father is, I said, and I suggest you call him, because you are going to need a lot more than a brand ambassador title where you are going. Preston backed away as the bailiffs approached. Don't touch me. This is a suit. This is custom. And that is when the screaming started. I have seen men cry in my courtroom. I have seen men pray, but I have never seen a grown man squeal like a piglet because his Italian wool jacket got wrinkled. When Deputy Miller, who is 6'4" and served 2 tours in the Marines, reached for Preston's arm, Preston didn't just pull away. He swatted at the officer. He actually slapped the hand of a federal bailiff. I said, "Don't touch the Tom Ford," Preston screamed. His voice cracked, hitting a pitch that was honestly painful to hear. Do you know how much this fabric costs per yard? You're ruining the silhouette. Deputy Miller didn't care about the silhouette. He didn't care about the fabric count. He spun Preston around with a practiced motion that was almost graceful. Preston's face slammed onto the defense table, right on top of his expensive leather binder. "You are assaulting me," Preston yelled, his cheek pressed against the mahogany. Charles, film this. This is police brutality. I'm being targeted." I looked over at Charles Sterling. The high-priced lawyer was methodically packing his briefcase. He didn't even look up. "Mr. Vander Wyck," Sterling said calmly, "I advise you to stop resisting. I charge for legal defense, not for babysitting during a felony arrest." Click. The sound of handcuffs tightening is distinctive. It's a metallic, final sound. In a quiet courtroom, it sounds like a heavy door slamming shut. Preston gasped. You cuffed me? You actually cuffed me? Get him out of here," I said to the bailiffs, "and add resisting arrest and assaulting an officer to the charge sheet." As they hauled him up, Preston's legs went limp. He tried to do that thing protesters do dead weight. But my bailiffs deal with dangerous criminals every day. They deal with murderers and gang leaders. A 140-pound trust fund baby in loafers was not a challenge. They dragged him, literally dragged him. The toes of his $1,200 shoes were scuffing against the linoleum floor, leaving black rubber streaks. "My father will buy this building," Preston shrieked as they reached the doors. "He will buy this courthouse and turn it into a parking lot. You're all fired. You hear me? You're all fired. I'll have your pensions. I'll have your badges." The doors swung open, and the screaming echoed into the hallway. "Daddy, call my dad. Tell him they're hurting me." And then the heavy doors clicked shut. Silence. Absolute, beautiful silence. The kind of silence you only get after a storm passes. I looked around the room. The court reporter was typing furiously, trying to capture every hysterical word. The gallery was stunned. I turned my attention to the plaintiff's table. Arthur Henderson was still standing there. He was clutching his hat so tight his knuckles were white. He looked like he was in shock. He had come here hoping for a few $1,000s to fix a window. He had just watched the most powerful scion in the city get dragged out in irons. Mr. Henderson, I said, softening my voice. Are you all right? He blinked, looking up at me. Judge, I didn't want him arrested. I just wanted him to stop throwing bottles. I just wanted to sell my burgers. I know, Arthur, I said, but sometimes when you stand up for yourself, you expose a bully for what they really are. You didn't arrest him. His own actions did. I looked over at the defense table. Charles Sterling was standing now, smoothing his tie. He looked unbothered, cold. Mr. Sterling, I said, you seem remarkably calm for a man whose client was just hauled away on felony charges. Sterling offered a thin, shark-like smile. Your Honor, Preston is impulsive. His father has cleaned up many messes before. I assume he believes he will clean up this one too. This isn't a mess, Counselor, I said. This is a crime scene. And unless his father has a time machine to unthrow that explosive, no amount of money is going to fix this. Sterling picked up his briefcase. With respect, Judge Boyd, you know who Preston Vanderwyck Sr. is. You know the reach of that company. You just declared war on a dynasty. I hope your pension is secure. It was a threat, a polite, legal threat, but a threat nonetheless. My pension is fine, Mr. Sterling, I said, staring him down. But you might want to worry about your bar license, because if I find out you knew about that dash cam footage and tried to suppress it, you'll be in the cell next to the boy. Sterling's smile vanished. He turned and walked out without another word. I thought it was over. I thought we would process the paperwork, set a high bail, and I would go have my lunch. I was wrong, because 10 minutes later, as I was reviewing the next case file in my chambers, my clerk, Sarah, burst through the door. She didn't knock. Sarah always knocks. Her face was pale. Judge, she said, breathless, you need to come back out. Now, what is it? I asked, standing up. Did Preston hurt himself? No, she said, swallowing hard. It's his father. He's here. And he didn't come alone. He brought the mayor. I walked back into the courtroom. The gallery was buzzing. And there, standing in the center aisle, was Preston Vanderwyck Sr. He was a giant of a man, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. Standing next to him, looking nervous, was Mayor Wilkins. The father didn't look at the bailiffs. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked straight at me. And he didn't look angry. He looked amused. Judge Boyd, the father boomed, his voice filling the room. I believe you have something that belongs to me. You think the son was bad? You haven't met the monster who made him. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Preston Vanderwyck Sr. said. He didn't ask it. He stated it like he was asking a valet for his car keys. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't stand up. I didn't blink. I let the silence stretch out until the mayor started shifting uncomfortably in his shoes. Mr. Vanderwyck, I said finally, this is a court of law, not a lost and found. If you are looking for property, the clerk's office is down the hall. If you are looking for your son, he is currently being processed for attempted arson and assault on a federal officer. The father's face didn't change. It was like granite. He walked forward, pushing past the bar, the wooden railing that separates the public from the court. That is a violation. You do not cross the bar without permission. My bailiff, Deputy Miller, stepped forward, his hand resting on his taser. Stand down, Preston Sr. barked at the bailiff. He didn't even look at him. He looked at me. Judge Boyd, let's cut the theatrics. I have a lunch meeting with the governor in an hour, and I intend to bring Preston with me. Mayor Wilkins here tells me there has been a misunderstanding. He gestured to the mayor. Mayor Wilkins wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked like a man standing between a lion and a cliff. Frank, the mayor said, using my first name. A mistake. Frank, look. Young Preston, he's spirited. We know that. But arson? Terrorism? That's a bit extreme, don't you think? The Vanderwyck family has donated 3 wings to the Children's Hospital. They renovated the library. Surely we can handle this administratively? Administratively, I repeated. Mayor, are you suggesting I ignore a felony committed on camera because his father bought some books for the library. I'm suggesting, the mayor stammered, that we don't ruin a young man's future over a prank. Drop the charges. Preston Sr. is willing to pay for the food truck. Double the value. Triple. Right, Preston? Triple, the father said, pulling out a checkbook. He actually pulled out a checkbook in the middle of a hearing. Name the price, Judge. Let's stop wasting tax dollars. I stood up then. Slowly, I picked up my gavel. Put the checkbook away, Mr. Vanderwyck, I said, before I hold you in contempt for attempting to bribe a judicial officer. The father stopped writing. He looked up, and for the first time, there was anger in his eyes. Real, dangerous anger. Bribe? He scoffed. It's called a settlement, you old fool, and you should be careful. My company employs 6,000 people in this district. I basically pay the taxes that keep the lights on in this dump. You think you have power because you wear a robe? I buy robes. I buy elections. He turned to the mayor. Tell him, Wilkins. Tell him what happens if he crosses me. The mayor looked terrified. Judge, please, just let the boy go on bail. We can sort this out later. You don't want to make an enemy of Vanderwyck Industries. The election is coming up next year. Is that a threat, Mayor? I asked. My voice was quiet, but it carried to the back of the room. Are you threatening a sitting judge in his own courtroom on behalf of a private donor? It's not a threat, the father interrupted, slamming his hand on the defense table. It sounded like a gunshot. It's a promise. You release my son right now, or I will bury you. I will dig up every parking ticket you've ever had. I will fund your opponent with $5 million. I will make sure you end your career judging pumpkin contests at the county fair. Do you understand me? The courtroom gasped. This wasn't legal maneuvering. This was a naked display of power. He was stripping away the pretense of the law and showing the ugly machinery of influence beneath it. I looked at Arthur Henderson, the victim. He was trembling. He looked ready to bolt. He thought he had won, and now he was watching the system crumble because a rich man yelled loud enough. I couldn't let that happen. Deputy Miller, I said. Yes, Your Honor? Lock the doors again. Preston Sr. laughed. Oh, stop it. You're not going to arrest me. You don't have the spine. Mr. Vanderwyck, I said, you just threatened a judge. You just admitted to buying elections, and you attempted to coerce the mayor into obstruction of justice. All on the record. I pointed to the court reporter. She was typing so fast her fingers were a blur. But you are right about one thing, I continued. I am not going to arrest you. The father smirked. Smart decision. No, I said. I'm not going to arrest you because I don't have jurisdiction over federal conspiracy charges. The father's smile faltered. What? You see, I said, picking up a piece of paper that had been sitting on my desk since the recess, the fax I received right after I called the district attorney. When I saw your son's phone records, I noticed something interesting. He didn't just call the health department. He made 12 calls to a number in the Cayman Islands, a number registered to a shell company that has been flagged by the IRS for money laundering. The room went deadly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. I didn't call the mayor, Mr. Vanderwyck, I said. I called the FBI. And they were very interested to hear that the CEO of Vanderwyck Pharmaceuticals was in my courtroom trying to buy his son's freedom with a checkbook linked to that same Cayman account. Preston Sr. looked at the mayor. You told me he was just a local judge. He is, the mayor squeaked. I am, I agreed. But the agents standing behind you, they aren't local. Preston Sr. turned around. Preston Vanderwyck Sr. turned around slowly. He didn't turn with fear. He turned with annoyance, like someone interrupting his dinner. Standing there were 3 men and 2 women. They didn't look like local deputies. They wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow letters across the back, FBI. The lead agent, a man with a face like carved stone, stepped forward. He held up a badge. Preston Vanderwyck Sr.? Who are you? The father demanded. Do you know who I am? I was having lunch with the governor in 40 minutes. You're going to miss lunch, the agent said. I'm Special Agent Miller with the Financial Crimes Division. We've been tracking that Cayman account for 6 months. We just needed a direct link to an overt act of bribery on U.S. soil. And thanks to Judge Boyd's live courtroom feed, The agent pointed to the small camera in the corner of the ceiling. You just provided it. Attempting to bribe a judicial officer, obstruction of justice, and using a wire transfer from a flagged account to facilitate it. The father's face went purple. This is a setup. This is entrapment. Mayor, do something. He spun around to look for Mayor Wilkins. But the mayor wasn't standing next to him anymore. Mayor Wilkins was currently trying to inch his way toward the side exit, looking at the floor, pretending he was invisible. Mayor Wilkins, I said from the bench, I wouldn't open that door if I were you. The mayor froze. Judge, Frank, I didn't know. I swear on my mother's grave. Preston just asked for a ride. I had no idea about the accounts. I was just trying to facilitate peace. Peace? I asked. You were facilitating a felony. And Agent Miller, I believe the mayor's campaign fund is also a subject of your interest? Agent Miller nodded. It is. Mayor Wilkins, we'll need you to surrender your phone and accompany us as well. A material witness for now. A co-conspirator if you lie. The mayor looked like he was going to vomit. He slumped against the wall, loosening his tie. But Preston Sr. wasn't done. He wasn't the type to slump. He was a fighter. The kind who fights dirty until the very end. You think you can take me? He snarled at the agents. My legal team will have your badges by sunset. I will sue the Department of Justice for harassment. I will bankrupt this entire city. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back, Agent Miller said, unclipping a pair of handcuffs. No, the father shouted. I am Vander Wick. I built this city. You work for me. All of you work for me. He actually took a swing. It was clumsy, desperate. He shoved Agent Miller. That was the last mistake he made as a free man. In one fluid motion, the agents swarmed him. They didn't care about the Italian suit. They didn't care about the donation to the library. They slammed him against the defense table, the same table his son had been dragged from 20 minutes earlier. Click. The second pair of handcuffs clicked shut. Preston Vander Wick, Agent Miller recited, you are under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and bribery of a public official. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. As they hauled him up, the father wasn't screaming for his daddy like his son. He was screaming threats. Vile, personal threats. He looked at me with eyes full of pure hate. You're dead, Boyd, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. You hear me? You're finished. I'll buy the courthouse and burn it down with you inside. Get him out of here, I said, waving my hand, and add communicating a terroristic threat to the list. They marched him out. The titan of industry, the man who bought elections, was frog-marched past the gallery, past the stunned onlookers, and past Arthur Henderson. Arthur Henderson, the food truck owner, stood up as the billionaire passed him. He took off his hat. He didn't say a word. He just watched. And for a split second, Preston Sr. looked at Arthur. He saw the man whose life he tried to crush. He saw the nobody who just toppled his empire. The doors swung shut. The shouting faded down the hallway. And then it was just us again. The mayor was being escorted out the side door by another agent, weeping into a handkerchief. The courtroom was empty of billionaires. I looked at the clock. It was 11:15 a.m. I looked down at Arthur Henderson. He was still standing there, holding his hat. He looked like he had just survived a hurricane. Mr. Henderson, I said softly. He looked up, tears in his eyes. Judge, is it over? The criminal part is just beginning for them, I said. But for you? Yes, it's over. Arthur took a deep breath. I don't know what to say. I never thought. I mean, he's Vander Wick. He was Vander Wyck, I corrected. Now, he's inmate number pending. But my truck, Arthur said, his voice trembling, it's still destroyed, and I don't have the money to fix it. And now, who am I going to sue? They're all going to prison. I smiled, a real smile this time. Arthur, I said, you don't need to sue them. You see, under state law, when assets are seized in a racketeering case that involves damages to a victim, the victim gets priority restitution. And since the FBI just seized his accounts, I leaned forward. I think we can find the money for a new window. In fact, I think we can find the money for a whole new fleet of trucks. Arthur's jaw dropped, but I wasn't done. Because justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys, it's about making the good guys whole. And I had one more surprise left for Mr. Henderson. One more surprise, I said, motioning for the bailiff to hand me a specific document from the printer. It was still warm. Arthur Henderson looked at me, confused. He was still processing the fact that the most powerful man in the city had just been dragged out in handcuffs. He was still holding his crumpled hat. Mr. Henderson, I said, do you know what treble damages are? He shook his head slowly. No, Your Honor. I'm just a cook. In cases of malicious destruction of property, motivated by bias or intimidation, I explained, signing the document with a flourish, the law allows the court to award 3 times the actual value of the damage, plus legal fees, plus emotional distress. And since Preston Sr. just admitted on the record to using his wealth to intimidate you, I handed the paper to the clerk, who walked it down to Arthur. I am authorizing an immediate lien on the seized Lamborghini Urus sitting in my parking spot. It will be auctioned by the U.S. Marshals. The proceeds, estimated at $300,000, are awarded to you, Mr. Henderson. Effective immediately. Arthur looked at the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. 300. Judge, that's my retirement. That's a whole restaurant. Build a franchise, Arthur, I said. Make the best burgers in the state. And name the first one Justice. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, and for the first time in months, he stood up straight. The weight was gone. The fear was gone. He walked out of that courtroom not as a victim, but as a victor. But while Arthur was walking into a new life, the Vander Wykes were walking into a nightmare. You want to know what happened in the holding cell? I have friends in the sheriff's department. They told me everything. Preston Jr., the boy who threw explosives for vibes, didn't handle the intake process well. When they told him he had to trade his Tom Ford suit for an orange jumpsuit, he refused. He actually tried to bribe the corrections officer with a promise of a yacht trip. The officer laughed and tossed him the jumpsuit. Put it on, or we put it on for you, Preston cried. He sat on the concrete bench in a cell with 3 other men, one of whom recognized him from the news. Let's just say Preston spent the night standing in the corner, very quiet, very polite. And the father, the Titan, Preston Sr. was in the adjacent block. He demanded his one phone call. He didn't call his wife. He didn't call his lawyer. He called the governor. Get me out of here, Tom, he screamed into the receiver. I funded your campaign. You owe me. There was a long pause on the other end. Then the governor's voice came through, cold and distant. Preston, haven't you seen the internet? The video of you threatening a judge is trending worldwide. If I help you, my career is over. Don't call this number again. Click. The dial tone hummed in his ear. That was the sound of his empire dissolving. The mayor had already rolled on him to the FBI. The governor had disowned him. His assets were frozen. For the first time in 60 years, Preston Vander Wyke Sr. was just an old man in a cage. But the story didn't end there. Because when the video of the hearing hit social media an hour later, the public reaction was unlike anything I had ever seen. It started with a few shares, then thousands, then millions. People were tired of bullies, tired of rich kids breaking things and laughing, tired of fathers buying their way out of trouble. By 0 p.m., there was a crowd forming outside the courthouse. But they weren't protesting. They were cheering. And right in the middle of them was Arthur Henderson. Someone had set up a GoFundMe for his truck before they even knew about the Lamborghini money. It had already raised $50,000. I watched from my chamber window. I saw the signs. Justice for Artie. No more bullies. It felt like a win. A clean, perfect win. But I should have known better. Because men like Vander Wyke don't go down without trying to take everyone else with them. At 4 p.m., my phone rang. It was a private number. Judge Boyd, a voice said. It wasn't the father. It wasn't the lawyer. It was a voice I didn't recognize. Low, mechanical. You had your fun today, the voice said. But you made a mistake. You seized the wrong account. That money in the Caymans? It wasn't just Preston's. He was holding it for people who don't care about court orders. And they want it back. The voice on the phone was cold. Mechanical. They want it back. I didn't hang up. I didn't stutter. In 40 years, I've had death threats from gang leaders, letters from serial killers, and once, a brick through my windshield. You don't sit in this chair if you scare easy. Listen to me closely, I said into the receiver. You tell them that the money is currently sitting in a federal evidence locker. If they want it back, they are welcome to come to the federal courthouse at 9 a.m. tomorrow and file a motion. I'll keep a cell open for them. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Then, click. I put the phone down. My hands weren't shaking. I was angry. Not the kind of anger where you yell, the kind of cold, focused anger that sharpens your mind. I called Agent Miller immediately. Miller, I said, I just got a call. Someone is upset about the Cayman seizure. They sounded organized. Agent Miller actually laughed. Judge, we were counting on that. That account wasn't just hiding Preston Sr.'s bribe money. It was a laundering hub for half the eastern seaboard. By seizing it, you didn't just bankrupt a billionaire. You kicked a hornet's nest. And we have the net ready. So, I'm bait? I asked. You're the hammer, Judge, Miller said. We're the anvil. Let them come. And they did try. Oh, they tried. That night, Vanderwyck's lawyers, a new team, since the old ones were distancing themselves, filed an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the Lamborghini. They claimed undue hardship. They claimed the car was a corporate asset essential for business. I denied the motion at 3 a.m. from my kitchen table. Denied. I wrote. Reason. A getaway vehicle for a hate crime is not a business asset. The next morning, the headlines weren't about Preston's prank anymore. They were about the collapse of a dynasty. Pharma giant raided by FBI. Vanderwyck stocks plummet 40% overnight. Mayor resigns amidst corruption probe. It was a domino effect. Once the fear of Preston Sr. was gone, everyone started talking. Former employees came forward with stories of abuse. Contractors sued for unpaid bills. It turns out, when you build an empire on fear, the moment you stumble, the wolves come for you. And in this case, the wolves were the people of this city. But the real moment of victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the parking lot of the courthouse 3 days later. The U.S. Marshals held the auction for the Lamborghini. The neon green Urus, the symbol of Preston Jr.'s arrogance, sat there on the block. A crowd had gathered, not just car buyers, but regular citizens, people who wanted to see a piece of the bully sold off. The bidding started at $100,000. It went up fast. $150,000. $200,000. Then, a man in the back raised his paddle. He was driving a beat-up pickup truck. It was Arthur Henderson. The crowd went silent. Arthur didn't have that kind of money. Not yet. But then, the man next to Arthur raised his hand. It was the owner of the biggest construction firm in the city, a rival of Vanderwyck. $300,000, the man said. Going once, the auctioneer yelled. Going twice. Sold. The construction owner walked over to Arthur. He handed him the keys. I don't drive green cars, the man said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But I hate bullies. Sell it, Artie. Scrap it. Burn it. I don't care. The money is yours. Arthur stood there, holding the keys to a $300,000 car that had been used to terrorize him. He looked at the crowd. They cheered. They actually cheered. Back in my chambers, I watched the footage. It was beautiful. But I still had one loose end to tie up, the voice on the phone. The partners in the Caymans, at 4 p.m. Agent Miller walked into my office. He looked tired but satisfied. We got them, Judge, he said, dropping a file on my desk. The call you traced? It led us to a server farm in New Jersey, which led us to the shell company. We arrested 12 people this morning. The partners aren't coming for their money. They're busy negotiating plea deals. And the Vanderwykes? I asked. Preston Sr. was denied bail, Miller said. Flight risk. He's facing 20 years. The son, Junior, he's taking a plea. 5 years. And he has to testify against his dad. No honor among thieves, I muttered. None, Miller agreed. But there's one thing, Judge. Preston Jr. made a request. A request? He wants to see you. Before he gets transferred to federal holding, he says he has something to say. I thought about it. I usually don't do exit interviews with defendants, but this felt different. Bring him in, I said. 10 minutes later, Preston Vanderwyck III shuffled into my chambers. He wasn't wearing Tom Ford. He was wearing County Orange. His hair was messy. He looked like a child, a scared, spoiled child who had finally been told no. He sat down. He didn't smirk. He didn't put his feet up. Judge, he whispered, I I wanted to ask. Ask what, Preston? I said sternly. You want your phone back? You want a better cell? He shook his head. Tears welled up in his eyes. No, he said. Just, I wanted to know, why did you do it? My dad said everyone has a price. He said he owned this city. Why didn't you just take the check? I looked at him, really looked at him, and I gave him the answer that would haunt him for the rest of his sentence. I leaned across the desk. I looked deep into the eyes of the young man who had spent his entire life believing that people were just inventory to be bought and sold. Preston, I said quietly, you asked why I didn't take the check. You want to know why your father's money didn't work here? He nodded, a tear sliding down his cheek. Because, I said, the most expensive thing in the world isn't a Lamborghini. It isn't a penthouse. It isn't a Senate seat. The most expensive thing in the world is a clear conscience. And that is the one thing your father couldn't buy, because he never had one to begin with. Preston looked down at his hands that were now cuffed to the table. He told me we were gods, he whispered. You aren't gods, son, I said. You're just defendants. The marshals took him away 5 minutes later. That was the last time Preston Vanderwyck III ever set foot in a luxury hotel. He took the plea deal. He testified against his father in federal court. He received 5 years in a minimum security facility. But his father, the Titan, Preston Sr., fought to the bitter end. He hired new lawyers. He tried to intimidate witnesses. He even tried to sue the FBI from his jail cell. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Racketeering, wire fraud, bribery, witness tampering. And thanks to my referral communicating a terroristic threat against a judicial officer, he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, no parole. The Vanderwyck pharmaceutical empire was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the thousands of people they had defrauded over the years. The penthouse, sold. The yacht, sold. The influence, evaporated. But that's not the part of the story I think about when I drive home at night. I think about 6 months later. I received an invitation in the mail. It wasn't a summons. It was a menu, a grand opening invitation for a place called Justice Burgers. I drove down to the old University District. There, on the corner where the food truck used to park, stood a beautiful brick building. The line wrapped around the block. Arthur Henderson was standing at the door, greeting customers. He wasn't wearing that old, tight suit anymore. He was wearing a crisp chef's coat with his name embroidered on it. When he saw me, he didn't wave. He stopped the line. He walked over to my car. Judge, he said, beaming. You came. I wouldn't miss it, Arthur, I said. I hear the food is criminal. He laughed. A real, deep belly laugh. Come inside. Table 1 is reserved for you, forever. I walked in. On the wall, framed behind glass, was a piece of metal. It was twisted and scorched. It was a piece of the ventilation hood from his old truck, the one Preston had blown up. Underneath it was a plaque that read, "The fire that didn't burn us only made us stronger." I sat down and looked at the menu, and there it was, right at the top, the Boyd burger served with extra heat. I ate that burger, and let me tell you, it tasted better than any steak dinner a billionaire could ever buy, because it tasted like dignity. It tasted like a win for the little guy. Arthur sat with me for a while. He told me he had hired 10 people. Half of them were at-risk youth. The other half were veterans. He was using the settlement money not just to build a business, but to build a community. You know, Judge, he said, wiping a crumb from the table. I used to hate them, the Vanderwykes. I used to hate that they had everything and I had nothing. And now? I asked. Arthur looked out the window at the long line of customers, at the sun shining on his name above the door. Now? He smiled. I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy working. That is the difference between power and strength. Preston Sr. had power, but he was weak. Arthur had nothing, but he was strong. In my 40 years on the bench, I have learned that justice isn't always swift. It isn't always pretty. Sometimes it gets messy. Sometimes the bad guys laugh first. But in my courtroom, the bad guys don't laugh last. If you enjoyed this story, if you believe that nobody is above the law, not the billionaires, not the politicians, not the sons of privilege, then do me a favor. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that right still matters. I'm Judge Boyd, and court is adjourned.